And now I'm going to turn it over to Mission Capital CEO, Madge Vasquez.
Thank you, Chelsea, and welcome everyone. It's so good to be with you this evening, this afternoon, after what I know has been a very challenging, heavy several weeks, and as we all navigate current events and the needs of our community together. Again, I'm Madge Vasquez, CEO of Mission Capital, and 2 years ago, we committed to an important mission to support leaders, organizations, and networks advancing equity and opportunity in Central Texas. 2 years ago, few of us could have imagined the deep challenges a global health pandemic would create and the continued racial injustices we bear witness to across the US. Bold, resilient, and compassionate community leadership is important now more than ever. And we are glad you've joined us tonight as you explore your call and commitment to nonprofit board service. We're encouraged that you are here to discover ways to lend your talents, your voice, and your resources as our community recovers and reimagines a more just future. And before we get started, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the current events that are happening across the US and in our own backyard. The murders of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, to Christian Cooper's experience with racism while birdwatching in a park. We couldn't start any discussion about centering equity or leadership without acknowledging these transgressions and the fact that change is long overdue, and change begins with us, addressing and dismantling racism and white supremacy. And with that said, we'd like to start with a moment of silence for Ahmaud, George, Breonna, and the countless other Black people that have been murdered because of racist acts. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Tonight's board summit is designed to equip and connect all of us as community leaders in this pivotal leadership moment. We have a rich agenda for all of us this evening. Today we'll hear from Ann Starr, our colleague at Mission Capital, about the critical importance of board members and skilled volunteers. Ann will introduce you to the 28 nonprofit organizations featured on our board summit page on our Mission Capital website. Many of them you'll see in the chat are participating along with you, and they'll be eager to answer your questions. We'll then hear from a stellar panel of board leaders as they share their leadership wisdom and their lived experience. And we'll also have some time for Q&A. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mission Capital's own board chair, Tomas Miranda, to say hello and thank our event sponsors. Tomas?
Thank you, Madge. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tomas Miranda. I've had the honor of serving on Mission Capital Board for the last 6 years, and I'm wrapping up my board role this summer. We thank you very much for joining us at tonight's board summit, and I also want to thank other community partners that helped make this session possible. Our presenting sponsor, Texas Capital Bank, and our leading sponsor is Blackbaud, and all the outreach partners who helped us develop and get the word out about this event, such as the new Philanthropist, I Live, I Give Here, Impact Austin, Leadership Austin, the Austin Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Austin Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Austin Asian Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Austin Black Chamber of Commerce, the Austin LGBT Chamber of Commerce, the Austin Young Chamber, and the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network. We're so grateful to these generous supporters and collaborators for making today's session possible. Thank you very much. And now I will turn it back over to Madge to share more about Mission Capital.
Thanks, Tomas. As we transition into the learning portion of effective board leadership and community leadership, I wanted to share 2 projects we've conducted at Mission Capital as context for our learning tonight. One is the recent Race to Lead survey that Mission Capital conducted in partnership with a national group called Building Movement. And the whole focus of this research was to better understand the racial leadership gap in Central Texas. Building Movement, which is based in New York, has done a series of studies across the country in major metro areas, and we were fortunate to partner alongside them to better understand our racial leadership gap in Central Texas. And here are the highlights that I believe are meaningful and informative for our conversation tonight. What we learned, both nationally and in Central Texas, is that leaders of color are qualified and ready to lead. In Central Texas, despite our diverse demographics, we continue to see a fairly monolithic, white dominant nonprofit sector in terms of staff executive leadership, as well as board leadership. And what the study showed us is that leaders of color are qualified, ready, and wanting to serve, interested in serving in executive roles and board roles. We also learned that there is a lack of mentorship many times for leaders of color who are aspiring to different roles in executive leadership or board leadership. And that the lack of diverse representation amongst our nonprofits is having an adverse impact. And so because we do not have folks who reflect the communities that we're trying to invite and serve, we are seeing a situation where fewer than 25% of our nonprofits here in Central Texas have board and staff combined leadership teams that are predominantly people of color. So we need more diverse representation at all levels. And we also know that in terms of individual nonprofit organizations led by people of color, that's a very small percentage as well. And so the respondents, only 3% of local staff respondents actually said that they worked for POC-led organizations. So this is just a snapshot of data in Central Texas that gives us an opportunity to think about how might we close the racial leadership gap in our nonprofit sector. The next study that we did, the most recent one, is a nonprofit pulse survey conducted by Mission Capital in partnership with many other organizations. The second pulse survey was focused on the impacts of COVID and how it was disproportionately impacting communities of color. And so the highlights showed that, as many of you know, we're all seeing incredible service disruption within our nonprofits who have seen increased demand in services, yet challenges in terms of operationally delivering on those services because of social distancing guidelines, the lack of PPE. We also know nationally that people of color are being disproportionately impacted by this health pandemic. And we're seeing that amongst nonprofits that are predominantly serving people of color. And then finally, again, on the nonprofit operational capacity side, those organizations that are serving primarily people of color are also having to make very tough decisions within their infrastructure and operations. We see more hiring freezes, more furloughs and layoffs. And we also see folks exploring strategic alliances and mergers as we all try to navigate and weather this crisis together. And so this data provides just a backdrop on how unique this leadership moment is given the COVID-19 crisis and what type of nonprofit leaders and board leaders our community really needs to continue to be resilient and to recover. And so with that, I am going to pass it along to my colleague, Anne, who is going to share more about how you can engage with our nonprofits, many of them who are joining us tonight. Anne?
Thank you, Madge. It's great to be with you. As Madge has shared, we have a real need for people in our community to serve, and we need people with a wide range of skills and life experiences to serve as board members. We wanted to take a little time this evening to share with you a little bit about the nonprofit sector, and as Madge mentioned, introduce you to a number of amazing nonprofits that are here in our community represented on this call, who have openings on their boards right now and are looking for new candidates. And we also wanted to share lots of different ways that you can get involved. Here in Central Texas or in Travis and surrounding counties, there are an estimated 7,000 established nonprofit organizations. That may seem like a lot, and it is, but less than 1,000 of those have even one paid staff member, so most are fairly small. About 75% of the nonprofits in Central Texas operate on less than $10,000 a year. So just like their for-profit counterparts, there's no one typical nonprofit organization. Nonprofits come in all shapes and sizes, and they are all managed a bit differently. They all have different revenue models, expenses, programs, and those sorts of things. And some have multi-million-dollar budgets and hundreds of employees, while others are all volunteer organizations. But one thing they do all have in common is that by law, they have to have a board of directors or an independent elected group of people who make sure that the mission of the organization is advancing. In other words, they're there to provide oversight and strategic guidance. By the way, the process by which people join boards is also fairly common. Candidates are identified or express some kind of interest. Then they tend to meet with the organization's other board members and executive leaders to get to know each other, talk through expectations or through some kind of vetting process. And then if all decide to move forward, they're voted on by the board in a board meeting. So in case you didn't know, that's the quick process. So because there are so many different kinds of nonprofits in our community, I am positive that there is one and probably several that are out there that would be a great fit for anybody on this call who is interested in getting involved in a cause they care about. Our boards are made up of everyday people, just like you and me, who care about making a difference. But as Madge is sharing, our boards they're most successful, and therefore the organizations they lead are successful when they are made up of a diverse group of people who bring different skills, lived experiences, perspectives, and relationships to the table. Being a board member is a significant commitment, though. It might not be right for everybody. And as you all know, nonprofits need all kinds of volunteers, especially lately. And they need our financial support too. Being a donor to a nonprofit really does make a tremendous difference. I like to think of it as investing in a solution to a problem that you agree needs solved. And that's really what our nonprofits are doing. They are solution providers to the many, many different challenges that our community faces. If you want to find organizations that are solving the problems you agree need solved, in other words, that are working on causes you care about, we'd encourage you to check out the Amplify Austin website. They have a kind of default directory of all kinds of local organizations that you can search for by mission focus. So it's a great place to find an organization that you might donate to or support as a volunteer. And then Mission Capital also has a list of members on our website that you might want to review. Okay. And then we, of course, are excited to introduce you to the 28 nonprofits that we are featuring on our webpage. So Chelsea, thank you. Next slide. Here they are. We are excited that we have put together a profile for each of these organizations based on information they've shared with us about the kinds of skills and characteristics they might be looking for in board candidates. Certainly information about their mission, what financial expectations, if any, they may have for donations from board leaders. So it's a great overview that you will all get as some of the follow-up materials to this class today. And you can go on the Mission Capital website and find a link to all of these organizations' websites too. So if you haven't already, nonprofit representatives that are on this call, please do chat hello to everyone so they know who you are, maybe a word about your mission. And then those of you that are interested in finding an organization with which to serve, we want you to have their introductions in case you want to privately chat anybody to maybe ask a question or learn a little more. feel free to do that as we're going through today. Okay. If you go to the next slide, Chelsea. So next we wanted to talk about what it is that nonprofit board members actually do. So we have our top 10 list of board roles and responsibilities that we wanted to go through relatively quickly. But just if you are thinking about board service, as I said, it's a big commitment. So we want you to know what you're getting yourself into. The job number one for all of our nonprofit board leaders, whether it's for an all-volunteer organization or for a large entity that has hundreds of employees. So no matter what the size or shape, the ultimate role of board leaders is to uphold and advance the organization's mission and vision. It's about making sure that you're checking in and doing that great oversight, providing strategic direction and insights, all so that that mission can get filled. So we would encourage you, again, if you're thinking about getting involved on a board, job number one is just being passionate about that mission. That's super important. Next up is ensuring effective financial, legal, and administrative oversight. So it is, again, is that oversight body that is going to review finances, make sure that the organization's, of course, handling everything in an appropriate legal manner, and that the day-to-day operations are well run, which really means, again, oversight, being a partner with the executive director and allowing that individual to run the day-to-day operations. So I believe that's number 3 on our list. Right, so to hire, support, and evaluate that executive director and CEO. It's a big, important partnership. And we hope, by the way, that if this is all new to you and you really want to learn more, that you'll attend a Board Essentials online class that Mission Capital offers for free to all of its member organizations and for a fee for anybody that is not on a board but is just thinking about it. And you can really learn a lot more about all this, the roles and responsibilities there. The next point. Yeah, so the next role and responsibility is to make sure that there's enough funds to support the mission. So a lot of time this looks like fundraising. Sometimes it is coming up with some creative social enterprise that helps fulfill the mission and that can bring in revenue. So there's lots of ways board members do this, but at the end of the day, it's also that you can make sure the mission is getting fulfilled. Making sure there's effective organizational planning is an important role of the board. In other words, you got to make sure you have a plan so that you can know if you're fulfilling your mission and that long-term vision effectively. Serve as an ambassador for the organization. So this means just representing the organization, being the extra extensions out in the community, a lot of the friend raising that is so important and that really needs to happen before the fundraising too. So just really being out there representing the organization and hopefully connecting it to some new friends and new partners that you can bring to bear as a board leader. Recruiting and mentoring new board members is an important board role. The board is the ultimate oversight and governing body for organizations. So it's up to the board members to take an active role in recruiting other individuals to serve with them and then evaluating their own performance. Actively participating in board meetings and organizational activities is a big deal, not just so that you can be at board meetings to vote on things, but to be just active in the life of the organization. So you have a good sense of what's going on so you can make good decisions. So that's why that one's important. Making sure that everything, especially the operations, are operated in an ethical and accountable and transparent manner is important because as nonprofits, we all exist to serve the greater good. So that is why you need an elected independent group of people to provide that oversight. And then finally, making sure that whatever programs and services the organization does really are fulfilling the mission and the vision. So this a lot of times means collecting information and evaluating the impact of the programs and services. And almost always working with staff to do that well and to just have a sense, because again, it's about making sure you're fulfilling the mission and the vision. There are lots of other ways to support local nonprofits, and I'm very excited that we will also be sending you a list of all of these resources in our follow-up materials with links to all of these different funds and volunteer match sites in town. So these are all local. There's one a national group that they have an Austin office. And a lot of these come from our outreach partners and groups like the New Philanthropist that does some wonderful programming for board leaders and people of color thinking about serving on boards that are on boards. And you'll get information on their programs too. So please take a look at those. Take a look at all those great profiles of the nonprofits that we're featuring. And always know that Mission Capital is here to support you in your search to get connected. Okay. Now I believe I'll turn it back over to Madge to introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Anne. And now we get to segue into our guest panel. And so again, I want to thank Anne and our 28 plus nonprofit organizations who are joining us tonight looking for new board leaders. Tonight, I'm really excited about highlighting the leadership experience of a very special panel of guests. And they'll be sharing their lived experience as leaders, as well as advice on kind of this unique moment and how to lead through crisis and why diverse leadership is important. And so I am honored to welcome and introduce our panelists and our moderator. And so Chris Rios is our moderator for this evening. He is also the driving force behind today's event as the Vice President of Community Development for Texas Capital Bank, our presenting sponsor. And he's also an engaged board member and civic leader in our community. We also have Amy Wong Mok, who is the founder and CEO of Austin's Asian American Cultural Center, and she also serves on the board of KLRU. We have Paulina Arteaga, who is the executive director of the New Philanthropists, a pioneering organization that works to create more racially diverse and inclusive nonprofit boards in Austin. And we have Toya Sarika Bell, an attorney and a longtime philanthropic and civic leader in Central Texas. We are fortunate that Toya currently serves on the Mission Capital Board and is a member of our Social Venture Partner Network. And so without further ado, I will pass it along to Chris Rios to lead our panel discussion. Chris?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Madge, for that introduction. On behalf of Texas Capital Bank, we'd like to thank the hardworking team at Mission Capital, its leadership, and all of you for joining us this afternoon. You know, we believe our purpose at Texas Capital Bank is to power prosperity in business and in life. We live our values every day by forging strategic partnerships with organizations to help our communities strive and prosper. And we are so grateful and proud to call Mission Capital our partner. And to all of you joining us today, we'd like to thank you in light of all the events that are occurring, not only in our community, but the communities across the country. It's a blessing to be here with so many individuals like you who are seeking ways to give back to help better shape our community. So with that, we are very blessed to have three distinguished panelists for a discussion on the importance of diversity and inclusivity on nonprofit boards. Toya, Paulina, and Amy, I will call out to each of you to answer the first question to kick off our panel discussion, which is please begin by telling everyone about your board service and other significant volunteerism that you've been involved with. And what has it meant to you, and why do you do it? I'd love to start with Toya, if we could. Toya, you're on mute. You're on mute, Toya.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for being a part of the call and just being a part of the mission of what we're doing at Mission Capital and your individual nonprofit organizations. You know, I grew up doing volunteer service with my mother and my grandmother, both, who were always engaged in the community. And my mother was on multiple boards and the president of several boards. And so I just grew up with that in my blood. When I moved to Austin, I immediately started getting involved in the community. I was very fortunate to have a mentor in Ada Anderson who recommended me to be on the Long Center board. So I was at one point the youngest member of the Long Center board, and I was there before the Long Center was actually built and stayed on there for many, many years, raising money to build that institution and then watch it become an operational, fully functional performing arts venue for our center, for our city. Board service is a passion of mine. Community service is a passion of mine, and I love being able to do that through board service and board leadership and doing hands-on volunteer activities in the community. I'm the former board chair of Leadership Austin, the vice chair of the Austin Bar Foundation Board, and I served on the Green Lights Board, which was the precursor organization to Mission Capital when it was starting. I'm also engaged in the Junior League of Austin. I've been one of their board members and multiple other community organizations. So as I said, I try to balance out my board membership, board leadership, and hands-on volunteerism in the community on a regular basis.
Thank you so much, Toya. I'd love to go to Paulina now. Paulina.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you, Mission Capital, for bringing this together and for putting these panelists together as well. I would say, well, first in regards to volunteerism, I've been a CASA advocate for almost 4 years, and I chose to do so because there was a lack of representation of advocates of color for kids at CASA. So I felt it was important for me to advocate for a kid that needed cultural connection, that we could share together, that I understood his struggles in relationship to my lived experiences, so I could advocate for him. This is the same cultural conscious perspective that I bring to a board position. It's integral that we make room for diverse lived experiences and cultural values on boards in order to serve the mission of that nonprofit and that community better.
Thank you so much, Paulina. Amy. Oh, Amy, you are on mute, Amy, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, so nonprofit type of organizations are very new to me because most of our social service in Hong Kong and in most Asian countries are done by the government. So it's a public service. So my first experience about a nonprofit board, it was when I was an intern as a therapist, and I was an intern for the Jobs for Youth in Boston, Massachusetts. And their mission is to deal with homeless children, teenagers, and help them to get their high school equivalent so that they can go into a trade school. And I have a wonderful mentor who introduced me to, the nonprofit world. And then I saw all these board members who came to the meeting where I had to, basically prepare paperwork for them, printing material. And these are all community people. And I was like, wow, community people can come together and to heal the social ills. And then as I start paying attention to all the nonprofits, then I come to realize how powerful actually nonprofits are in this country. Just to give an example about MAT, Mother Against Drunken Driver. I remember when I first came here in '75, drunken driving is no big deal, and now it is a big deal, So I think it's just a group of mothers coming together and can make, legislative change, can change the law, can really change the community. So, but then, when I start joining the nonprofit board, was when I starting forming my own board. I founded the Asian American community, and then I have to learn from ILS that we have to have board members, at least 5 of them, so I have to get myself, educated, to be in compliance with the ILS 501c3 nonprofit status. Then because I work at the Austin Rape Crisis Center, so I was involved in the TASA, the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault Board, and become their chair and, serve on the National Council. And that really started my my path, to serve on different kind of nonprofit board for over, since 1995. So, so right now I'm serving on the board of Austin PBS and Arrow. And so I have served on United Way, the Long Center. So I have, and I'm still on the Arts Commission, you know, so as a community person, we can truly make a difference to heal the social ills. And it is a very important role, and it needs all kind of experience to really make a real change for our community. So I'm really committed to this volunteerism in serving on boards and help change policies. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
thank you
Mission
so much.
Capital.
And thank you for all that you all our panelists have been doing for the community. I want to go into our next question, which is, we've heard a lot today from the Mission Capital team about the need to address the racial leadership gap that is present on our local nonprofit boards and even in their executive staff ranks. So what are your experiences as leaders in the community with that issue? And what is it that individuals such as the ones on today's conference can do to help move the needle in that area? I'd like to start with Paulina, if I could, with this one.
Sure. Well, this is why the New Philanthropists exist. We're on a mission to close this gap and to help leaders of color gain access and opportunity to sit on boards, as well as help nonprofit boards become diverse and inclusive. We know that over 80% of nonprofit boards nationwide are made up of Caucasians, yet 60% of nonprofits serve communities of color. So this means that key decisions on budgets, programs, planning, and many more are being predominantly made by boards that are not representative of those communities. So you can see how cultural missteps can easily happen, as well as those communities not being served to their full potential. So as a board member or volunteer, I would ask, who thrives and has influence in the organization I serve? Who has authority in the organization I serve? Who has the most access in the organization I serve? And if you're not comfortable with those answers, then challenge the leadership in that organization to begin their journey in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we know here from the Youth Philanthropists through Mission Capital, there are resources to begin those journeys in helping your board or your organization become more representative of the community they serve.
Thank you. And what about you, Amy? What's your experience with this issue? What have you been seeing?
Well, it is, I'm always one or two minorities members on, you know, some real major board. And I was intimidated in the beginning, but I think I always remember what my professor has told me, that everyone's experience is important. She wasn't talking about skills or knowledge, she was talking about experience, and everybody has their unique experience. And I think if, so when I find, well, I am very selective, you know, in serving on different boards, because we only have 24 hours a day, and I have my daytime job and, you know, other passion that I have. Like wine tasting, you know, so so I am very selective in picking the board. So when they come to invite me, you know, to serve on the board, I will ask questions, you know, about their vision. And I will always tell them that I am not a wallflower. I'm not here to fill your quota. And you know, you have to be careful about inviting me to serve on your board, because I'm passionate about whatever I do. And so you may not like it because I will be more outspoken than you think, you know, and I think it is very important as a minority serving on a board that with people who don't look like us. It is really upon us to really share our unique experience with the majority of the board members. So do not be intimidated, empower yourself, and find someone in the executive committee that you could, you don't have to wait for a mentor to approach you. You can choose your own mentor. You can find someone that, oh, I think we share the same value or the same style. You know, then you start having this morning coffee with them and just learn more about the organization. because we don't want to waste our time in just to be there. You know, we want to be there to really make a difference. And so you have to value your own experience, value your resources, because your time is your resources, you know. And it's just like today, you know, when March called me and wanted me to serve, and this is a very important organization, and this experience, you know, to potential board members, especially minority board members who are going to make a difference. So I'm willing to offer, you know, my experience and my time, you know, and I take it as a transformation. I know after today, after I have shared what I have with you, you, all of you in the audience and myself have gone through some transformational type of experience, because I will not be the same person before I joined this panel discussion. So value those experiences, and they are important. And those are your cushion and your foundation as you advance yourself to be policymakers.
Thank you, Amy. That's wonderful feedback and perspective as well. Toy, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, thank you. I echo everything that's been shared by Paulina. These organizations doing great work. And Amy. Amy and I both served actually on the Long Center board together for many, many years. So she was a colleague, a cohort, a conspirator, and an inspiration in her leadership there. One of the things that I think is really important is a point that Amy touched on about mentorship. So there are the formal mentoring programs through the new Philanthropists, but then there are also mentors all around you. And many times you're not aware that people are watching you and thinking, and they have plans for you that may not have even been shared. A great example is Libby Malone, who's one of the founders of Greenlights. She was our advisor to the board of directors for the Junior League of Austin, and I was on the board of directors. And so she was able to see my passion for community service, my work in the league, my work as a board leader in the league, and she recommended me to be on the Greenlights board when she founded Greenlights. So those are examples. And then the same thing when I moved to Austin, I met Ada Anderson, a prominent philanthropist and board leader, African-American woman in the community, and got to know her. And she invited me to be on the Long Center board and asked me if I'd like to be recommended to be on that board. So there are people around you all the time. There could be people that you work with, people that you're doing other volunteer work that are thinking about board leadership and board membership opportunities for you. And the key is to be ready to step through that window of opportunity when it's extended to you. And so what can you do to be ready? One of the things that Amy talks about, you know, thinking about your passion in the community. What exactly are you passionate about? What are the causes that you care about? Do you want to be on a board that is doing guidance and advisory work, sort of a bigger, these much larger organizations, or do you want to be on a board that's boots on the ground? You know, you want to work for a grassroots organization where you're really in there, you're doing hands-on community service and board leadership at the same time. And I would suggest to you or submit to you that in this current environment, because of the pandemic and because of the social and racial injustice things that we're seeing right now, many of these grassroots organizations are the organizations that really, really need your support, your relationships, your energy, your talent, and your commitment, because those boards, often those organizations are small. Those are the nonprofits that are led by one person, and maybe they have one staff person, or maybe it's just the executive director and the board. And those are the organizations that really need all of us today. The larger organizations need our help. I'm not pushing that to the side, but the smaller grassroots organizations are often led and created by individuals with lived experience in the area that they're trying to provide services, and they have a very strong personal passion for the mission, and they're looking for people who have all these other skills to help make that passion and that mission a reality and make it possible for them to actually deliver services to people that need them. So don't discount those smaller organizations as you're thinking about what you'd like to do in the community.
Thank you, Toy. You touched on something during your response that actually is a great segue into our next question. Given that we as a community, economy, we're trying to figure out how to operate in this norm under the COVID pandemic. So from your perspective with your involvement with nonprofit leadership, how has COVID changed anything about your board or volunteer experience? If you can just share any observations you've had these past 3 months.
Yeah,
And I'll start with Toll, if I could. Oh, Toya, would you go ahead and take the first stab at it?
absolutely. Thanks. So one of the things that I think we've all seen as a result of the pandemic is that the broad swath of inequities that exist in our society today. You know, we're seeing inequities based race, gender, you know, socioeconomic status. We're seeing all of those inequities across the board are now there to see. And I think that that creates an opportunity for organizations and for individuals who want to serve and be passionate in the community to actually provide the services that are needed in those areas, because those areas have always needed services, but for whatever reason, it wasn't always apparent to the masses. And because of the pandemic, that's now knowledgeable to everyone. It's laid bare the inequities that exist across society. The second thing is that for individuals that are involved in board service or volunteerism, you know, we've seen that organizations may not have been prepared to be sustainable under these types of circumstances. And so questions, you know, for board leaders and for new board members coming onto a board to ask about is, you know, what is your strategic plan? Do you have one? What is your crisis management plan? Do you have, you know, let's talk about your finances. Do you have cash reserves? Many organizations don't have cash reserves beyond a month. Many don't have cash reserves at all. So what are your cash reserve situation? How do you plan to raise funds now that we can't have these gatherings and get together and have events to raise funds? Do you have cash on hand? Do you have a line of credit? Do you have a solid line of philanthropists that are supporting the mission of your organization regardless? And then another aspect is, how do you provide services? Many organizations are driven by hands-on service to the community. And in this environment, that's been curtailed. So what have you thought about in terms of strategic thinking and outside the box planning and how you can still reach the people who need those services? So those are just a few things that I've observed that have come up in organizations that I've been in and that we're talking about. You know, we're talking a lot about virtual engagement. We're talking about how to use the technology that we have to have different kinds of events where people can make contributions and still be aware of the mission and vision of the organization and how it's changing. And then we're talking about our strategic plan, because now that we've experienced a pandemic, that needs to be part of our strategic planning and crisis management for the future. Many organizations just weren't prepared for that because it was something that frankly had not occurred, you know, since the last plague, you know, that none of us were alive for hundreds of years ago. So we just weren't anticipating this, and I think it's an opportunity for us to stretch and to grow and to think about new ways to serve the community.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Thank you. Amy, what have you been seeing?
Okay. Well, we are living in history. So there is a great opportunity here, because none of us, unless you are over 100 years old, have not gone through this. And, you know, shelter in place is a new term. Social distancing is another new term. So I find that in every board, they have their own characteristic. Some board members are very hands-on, and some board members are just bringing in their resources and bringing in their connections. You know, they are both important. So in dealing with this pandemic, I think it requires board members to be more creative and to really summon all that they have in them, you know, the connection, the resources, and to have their creativity. And sometimes you might need to think outside the box, you know, and to, you know, and the attitude is so important. I think attitude is very important. So either you say, oh, well, this is just too heavy, I cannot, you know, deal with it. Or you say, this is an opportunity. I'm going to peel the onion one layer at a time and see how far we can go. And I think that attitude is very important, but I wanted to talk on something that I forgot to mention, that for any members who want to serve on a board, I think it is really important that they ask board orientation and to see if they have a board affair committee, to really guide you through, the mission and the vision of the organization. So you really get involved with your open, hearts and eyes, so that you know what you're getting into. So if you are really passionate about that mission, so COVID-19, this pandemic is just another way to overcome those challenges. So I think that attitude is important. I think the passion in you that I wanted to this organization that you get involved to be successful, all of these are so important. And I really think that attitude is really on top of my list in dealing with the unforeseeable challenges.
Thank you so much, Amy. And Paulina, what have you been seeing given COVID with your experience with board service and leadership?
Sure. Well, I definitely echo everything that Toya and Amy have shared. For me personally, COVID has amplified the lack of equity that exists in the nonprofit sector here in Austin, which to me, what I've really heard and what that means is that small to medium nonprofits that don't necessarily have the access or connections or staffing to gain funding are struggling to survive right now. So they desperately need volunteers now more than ever, and board representation that can help them gain those resources and help them pivot their programming. And more than anything, if you have a skill set that would be, whether it's a financial skill set or, anything with legal or technology, that's really going to help these smaller nonprofits, get through this COVID pandemic and continue to serve those communities, because those communities are going to be the ones that suffer the most at the end that they're serving.
Thank you all. And I have to echo everything you've said. Just from my observations, it's been tremendous how nonprofits have tried to be as innovative as possible, utilizing technology to deliver their services now. But I agree that there's still a big need for voices at the table to ensure those services are still as impactful as possible, given the new norm of how business is done, so to speak. And I think a lot of the callers or attendees on today's call might be able to offer that voice or to give the organization something they didn't think about. But this whole role of a nonprofit board member, I think we're trying to demystify it and simplify it. And I think a lot of us are very grateful for the advice you've been giving us so far. But I guess, we're closing out kind of our this is the last question for our panel before we go into Q&A, but I think it's a great one, which is, what advice that you haven't shared yet would you still give to those who are thinking about getting involved but haven't yet? And I'd love to start with Amy on this one, if we could.
Okay, well, thank you. I really think that it's a privilege. It truly is a privilege to be able to afford, because afford with your time, and your resources to serve on a board. And with the passion that you share, this is a path that you can really leave behind your legacy. So when you look back, 30, 40 years from now, and you can really see the track, the track that you have left behind. And it is such a privilege, and I truly believe all of our resources, our finance resources, our time, our talent, and our skills, they are just resources. And you have to give meaning to it. You have to give meaning to all those resources. So serving on a board, doing any volunteer work, especially serving on a board as a volunteer, you can really truly make a difference in setting or changing or improving the policy that will impact that will impact much more people, in the community, So I empower all of you who are thinking about serving on a board. It is a calling, and it is a privilege, and it is a great opportunity for you to leave behind your track and leave behind your legacy. So go do it.
Thank you, Amy. It is a calling. I love that phrase. Let's go to Paulina. Could you go?
Sure. I would say follow your heart cause. That's a cause to me where you know that your cultural background, lived experience, and skill sets are really going to further that organization's mission, and use all of the resources available to you, because being prepared, whether you're a volunteer, but most importantly, a board member, is important. It can be a little intimidating. So there are resources through Mission Capital and the Philanthropists even to help you prepare to serve on a board and to help navigate that experience. And I would say lastly, just know that you're needed and valued, because representation matters now more than ever. So you are needed to serve, and it is important, and the communities you serve will be very grateful.
And Toya, could you share some thoughts?
I would just add to what's already been said by saying, think about where your passion is, and that's where you should serve. What are you passionate about in the community? Where do you want to make a difference? Where do you feel like you have skills that maybe are untapped in other areas, but you can use them in the community, and choose to serve in that area? Learn as much as you can about the organization. Of course, you'll have the board orientation that Amy mentioned, but do some of your own homework. Get online and go to their website, research them, and find out what kinds of programs have they implemented in the community. How successful are those programs? Do you see opportunities where you can add impact? That's a question that I often ask when I'm approached to serve on a board or serve on a committee or some special event. I'll ask, where can I have the biggest impact? What can I do that will really be impactful and move the ball forward? And that's where you want to be aiming for in your board service. And think about all the ways you can be impactful: your professional skills, the knowledge you've learned on other boards, and volunteering in the community, your relationships. Most of you that are here, you're here because you're already engaged in the community. So you have broad networks, and many of our networks overlap, but the key is syncing up our networks with our passion in these board opportunities and in community, hands-on community events. And so think about who is in your network, what organization, what person can help you advance the causes that you're passionate about. And I think that's going to make for a truly rewarding board experience for you.
Thank you so much, Toya, Paulina, and Amy. Now, we are going to go into our Q&A portion of our panel discussion. And for that, I'm humbly going to turn it back over to Madge. So Madge, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Amy, Paulina, and Toya, for sharing your leadership wisdom with all of us. We're going to go ahead and open up the floor to Q&A. And so I would encourage you to chat us your question. My colleague Chelsea will be reading them aloud. And feel free to ask questions we might not have asked, or ask follow-up questions of our moderator and panelists. And so we'll give it a moment. Lots of thank yous.
Yeah, and just a note, please feel free to chat to everyone in the box, or if you have a question that you'd prefer I ask anonymously, you're welcome to chat me as well.
All right, so I've got one. What's been the biggest challenge to board service? And so whoever wants to answer that first. What's been the biggest challenge to board service?
May I answer?
Yes.
Okay. I remember it was like the second meeting I was at the United Way board. And at that time, they were talking about Boy Scouts, that they exclude the LGBTQ, members. And United Way have been funding Boy Scout for years. And so there was a discussion about that. And while I was sitting there and watching and listening to all this discussion, remind you, this is my second board meeting. And so I just need to speak up, because that was a pretty big board, and you have, you know, the UT president, the Sing-Ed president, all those president, you know, and board, you know, bank president. And I have to be sitting on my integrity and just ask that question. I said, United Way is an inclusive organization, right? So how can we sponsor an organization that excludes certain group of people, you know? So we just need to, and also when we accept donation for United Way, do we exclude LGBTQ people, you know? And so how can we accept donation from that organization and then we exclude us, you know, support organization that exclude? So, I mean, so be able to sit on your integrity, even in front of a big board with all these powerful people. You need, you know, remember one of the board responsibilities is the duty of holding the mission and the vision of the organization accountable, and that is very important to be able to do that.
Great example. Thank you, Amy. Any other examples of what's been the hardest part of board service?
Well, from my perspective, given my two nonprofit boards that I've committed some time to, you know, learning to not be afraid to ask questions was definitely the first big hurdle. So really, like our panelists have shared, is really speaking up and asking questions, and fighting complacency on a board. But also learning to really listen and accept the fact that if you don't agree with something at the board, you speak up, you advocate respectfully. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that a board of directors is like a unit, a one mind hive, if you will. And when a decision is made, the board speaks as one. So whether you're not on the side you want it to be, you have to understand that you volunteer your time. You have to be behind the decision of the group that you will have agreed to volunteer for. So just learning how to deal with difficult conversations, but also not being afraid to have them, and to really challenge the way an organization thinks has been a growing opportunity that I've been blessed to have thus far.
Thank you, Chris. Any others on most challenging board experience before I go on to the next question?
I would say, in general, I think it can be a little bit intimidating when you go on a board and you know there's a give and get policy, right? It's a little bit of that added pressure of having to make sure that your commitment is not only of your talent, but it's also of your time and treasure. And that can be intimidating for many. So I would say that if that is a challenge for you, talk to your board chair and see if there's a creative way to kind of make that happen for you. Whether it's you kind of creating your own fundraiser to meet that give and get policy, to monthly payments. I mean, there's just many different ways. And sometimes, with the New Philanthropist Board, we've done in-kind services. We know that there's a lot of talented people that their services costs are worth something. So we do in-kinds too. So, I would always, if that's something that discourages you or just kind of intimidates you, I think there's ways around it if you definitely talk to the board and the board chair about that.
Great. Thank you, Paulina. Let's see, Chelsea, we had another question. You had one. You want to read it out?
Yes. We had a question. What is the best way to approach an organization about interest in their board? Do boards prefer you having had experience volunteering with them previously? And I'd love to hear from the panelists, and then if any of the nonprofits want to share their perspectives in the chat, would be welcome as well.
You want me to go? Okay. I think when you find a passion, that your passion that is shared by the mission and vision of an organization, I think it doesn't hurt to volunteer first, to really get to know their operation and how a volunteer is being valued, you know. So I think it doesn't hurt to really go to do some volunteer work, get to know them before you really dive into this commitment, because it's a commitment. Because, you know, board meeting, you need to have a quorum to run business, you know. So if you don't show up, if you cannot make that commitment, you should not promise, because that is important. So I think to go there and volunteer first is a good idea for you and also for the organization.
Great.
Now, I would just add that in terms of volunteering, one of the things for, especially for those of you that might be new to the community, so you don't know exactly where should I be volunteering, right? And there's some other organizations that can help you along the way. I often tell people who are new to the community, you know, if they want to get involved with the Junior League has, you know, over 50 different nonprofit organizations that have already been reviewed. They have solid finances. They have a great board. They have, you know, diversity initiatives in place. They have, you know, their books have been audited. So all of those things have already been reviewed. And so as a volunteer, you're just going in and working on special projects for the entire year. And, you know, they're required hours and there's some requirements, but you don't have to worry about trying to figure out the vetting process because someone else has done that for you and you can experience the volunteerism and see if there's a match with your passion. Another thing that I did when I moved to Austin, the United Way had a panel called the Fund Allocation Committee. And I was on that committee. I had been involved with United Way when I lived in San Antonio before moving to Austin. And as a member of that committee, we reviewed all the nonprofits that received grant funds from the United Way. And so we had 2 site visits per year. And so as a newer person to Austin, I'm, you know, reviewing the grant requests and looking to see, is this nonprofit actually performing the services that they promised to perform with the funds that United Way provided them, and meeting their executive director, meeting their board members, visiting their facilities, meeting some program participants. And that was a great way for me to see how effective were these particular organizations in the community. And there's several other, you know, experiences that you can do. The City of Austin has different boards and commissions that give out funds in the community. But the City of Austin Arts Commission gives out grant funds to arts organizations in the community. That's a great way to learn about all the arts community, all arts organizations in one spot in the community. So think about, you know, if you haven't picked a place yet that you want to volunteer, think about doing something with one of these other organizations where you can get a bird's eye view of multiple organizations and then make your assessment of where you'd like to follow up. You can also do that if you volunteer with things like, I volunteer with my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and we have nonprofit organizations we partner with throughout the year. And so if that's something that I then want to do individually, I can, knowing that I've already had that experience as a group with the organization. I have a sense of what they do and how well they do what they do.
Thank you, Toya. And I'm going to transition us into the last question, which is, given that we have a lot of nonprofit staff and organizations joining us tonight that support boards, as staff, what tips or advice do you all have for how best to support a board of directors? And so nonprofit staff or crowdsourcing, what tips or advice do you have on how to best support a board of directors? And you can chat or, yeah, chat. And since I am staff, I'll kick it off. So, yeah, I think, you know, at least, you know, as a nonprofit executive, one of the things that I strive to do to support our board at Mission Capital is to share timely information and to bring folks in, particularly when we as nonprofit staff are maybe navigating a difficult decision. You know, there's there are all sorts of best practices around board governance, right? There's a role for the CEO and nonprofit staff in operationalizing a strategy and a vision. And then there's a role for the board of directors who are responsible for strategic vision, oversight, financial sustainability, community reputation. And there are times where sometimes those lines kind of blur, especially I would say when organizations are smaller or in startup mode. And so one of the things that I've tried really hard to do is create clarity in terms of the board roles and responsibilities, and be real clear as the executive, as the staff, to not try to overgovern, because that's not my role, but to really manage the executive work of the nonprofit. And as staff, I'm always shared with the board that I need feedback. You know, one of the 10 board responsibilities that Anne talked about was CEO evaluation and performance review. We need feedback as staff. And so your open, honest, constructive feedback is really important. Any others? Any other advice from nonprofit staff for boards?
Hi, my name is Robin Johnson. How much time do I have? I just wanted to make an introduction to the nonprofit I serve on.
Yes, go ahead, Robin. Couple minutes.
Okay, I'm a secretary and director of the Black Mamas ATX. We are known as Black Mamas Community Collective. I am a recipient of services. I started off as a volunteer. After I had my now 18-month-old, I became a volunteer, and then I worked a little bit for them for a couple months. I needed their support services because of postpartum depression. And then once we got started, I was able to help them get the process started, follow up with their nonprofit. And so we are recognized as a nonprofit in the state of Texas. Our mission is to eradicate, not word by word, but eradicate maternal mental health. I just had a 3-month-old. And so I do have problems with my memory. However, we are an organization to advocate for Black mothers who are dying. Right now, we die at a 2.3 times more likely rate of anyone else. And I'm in the military. I've been in the military 14 years. I have a master's degree, and I still suffered from preeclampsia, and I had all those conditions on the ACEs, in addition to experiencing racism in the hospital that I was in. I had a doula that I paid for out of pocket, and I felt like crap, and so my own testimony, but right now, because of COVID, we are running into a dilemma where the funders that we were planning on reaching out to, they are no longer accepting new funders, and we are doing those strategic partnerships that you spoke of. Unfortunately, these partnerships are with institutions, and so their priorities are theirs, and our priorities is solely community. It's focused on community. And we want to break away, but it's been really difficult for us. And I just because I'm very passionate, and I know the women that are full-time employees, they may lose their jobs. They gave up excellent jobs. They're educated. They gave up excellent jobs because they believed in our mission and vision. And so I just, I've been over the last couple of days, I've been crowdfunding, and I've raised $1,000 in 24 hours. But I'm just want to put it out there. If you're looking to give, right now our organization is really hurt because we have a passion about serving Black mamas. In that household we have Black men, and seeing the murder of who you mentioned earlier, Mr. Floyd, mm-hmm. and Mr. Avery, it's really in the protests. We are drained to the max, still having to go to work, still seeing these things, people experiencing COVID. I had COVID. I was interviewed by Spectrum. I had COVID in the beginning stages. I mean, I didn't have COVID, but I had my baby in the beginning stages of COVID. And then when I got out, everything was shut down. So like our community is just experiencing all of these setbacks and roadblocks, and it has, you know, we're just tired, and we're like, can our allies, you ask what you can do, you can give to us. We're tired, or can you do this work for us while we take a break?
Mm-hmm. Thank
we
you,
still
Robin.
have to provide services. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Robin, for your leadership at Black Mamas ATX and for all of the work that you are doing to serve our community. And y'all heard Black Mamas ATX is fundraising and needs support. And so, Robin, please include website and contact information and as folks are looking to support. And we look forward to working with you.
Large donations, they have to go through UT, but we are not 501c3. We're still waiting. We're pending. And so we won't be able to give a tax receipt right away, but if you bear with us, we, you know, make sure we follow up on everything because the times are hard. We're in the middle of a pandemic.
Thank you, Robin.
Appreciate
And
it.
someone has
Thank
just
you.
shared your website, so we've got it in the chat box. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of our panelists again, and Anne and Chelsea, the Mission Capital staff, for tonight's programming. I am going to pass it along to Chelsea to wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I wanted to make sure that we just have a few final closing thoughts. I think a really great reminder is that this is just the beginning, right? This was just a conversation where we started talking about the things that we can do. So wanted to follow up with a few commitments on our end. So we will be following up with resources on the way to your email inbox and afterwards to our community at large. So we'll have a recording of this session. We'll have a document with 28 nonprofit profiles and board service opportunities, document with volunteer and donation opportunities, and training opportunities for current and future board members, and information from the new Philanthropists on upcoming programs for prospective board members as well. We do ask that you complete our brief evaluation survey. We're learning, and we want to make sure that we continue this support beyond just this evening and continue to build our network together with you. And I really appreciate the perspective we just heard too, because I think the biggest call that we asked today is to think about what action will you take. And so our final closing thought for the evening is what's the one thing that you can commit to with your service, with your time, with your talents and energy? We'd love to hear from you. If you'd love to share it with the chat, we'd love to see what you're considering. And we take this as a nonprofit ourselves. We take that question and that commitment internally as well. So we are really, really grateful. We have many opportunities to keep learning more and staying informed and connecting at Mission Capital, whether through membership or our training courses or any of the other resources we have available. We'll be in touch about future opportunities. For those of you who registered for this session, please stay tuned for opportunities to use your voucher. We're exploring ways to stay connected in this pandemic, and things are changing, and we're all going online. We're eager to see you, but we aren't quite sure what that will look like yet. But thanks again to all the sponsors and to everyone who joined us tonight and supported Mission Capital's work, and all of the panelists. Thank you. We are so grateful for all of your support, for your time today, and for being with us this evening. It's the end of our session. Thank you for joining us, and we will be in touch.
Thanks for your leadership, everyone. Onward and upward.
Yes.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.